Let's see if the next speakers can add something to the definition of DevOps. You'll see our next three guests later on in the conference, as they also have prepared individual presentations for us. For now, what's better than a DevOps panel debate? First, we'll have Julia Biro, site reliability engineer at Contentful. She's interested in scalable systems and automation and the whole DevOps culture. Please welcome Julia to the stage.
Hi.
Joining her in this debate, we have Jovanovic, senior software developer at Nearform. Ivan has more than 8 years of experience with international companies and loves to share his knowledge. Let's welcome Ivan. And our moderator for this panel is Luke Briner, CTO at Pixel Pin Limited from UK. Guys, you have the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Marius for introducing everything so well. In fact, he's probably answered most of the questions that we had, which is cool. But I think for what I'd like to do here is really take you on a journey through DevOps. How many people here, hands up please, would say that you know very little about DevOps and you're trying to kind of understand a little bit? And how many people maybe know a medium size and they want to learn a bit more? And how many people are experts? Great. Do you want to come up and join us on the stage? Help us out. So my first question I'm going to ask these guys. So I guess my background is in companies that don't do DevOps. So very traditional, what we might call waterfall. So that's where I'm coming from. I've seen DevOps. I've introduced it a little bit at my company. Ivan has kind of been in several companies and worked on both sides. And Julia really is kind of the expert in the expert companies who will be able to maybe speak a bit more about how to do DevOps really well. So I guess the first question is, maybe it's a silly question because it is a buzzword as we heard earlier, but to you, what does DevOps mean to you? If I was in a lift and I said, I've never heard of DevOps, what is it? What would you say?
Yeah, you can hear me. So I have one story when someone asked me what's a DevOps. So I'm from Belgrade, I'm from Serbia, and here when we started to play football like 100 years ago, the goalkeeper wasn't called a football player. He was just a goalkeeper. That's the football player's best friend. So to me, a DevOps is just a developer's best friend. So he's there as a support to help them with the infrastructure stuff. And yeah, that's some definition to me that's simple. You know, a developer's the best friend.
Anything to add, Julia?
Yeah, so in my mind, DevOps is the notion that everyone in the company or in whoever is working on a product is aware of the full life cycle of the product and is somehow contributing to it. So DevOps is not a layer on top, but it is the idea that even if you are just polishing the shape of a button, you are aware that how your code is going to be run, who are your users going to be, how that thing is tested. And you get, like Marius pointed out, it needs a lot of tooling, but you have the tooling to use that knowledge without having to know about all the technical details or having to become a systems administrator in order to operate your service.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I guess it's fair to say that DevOps is much more a culture or a mindset than it is a system or tooling specific. Because as Marius pointed out very well in his slides, all of these things support what we are trying to achieve with DevOps, which, as Julia says, is this kind of joint ownership, but also the ability to iterate quickly, to change quickly, to get stuff out quickly. And I remember something I read about Facebook a couple of years back were saying that, you know, they had this idea that you deploy quickly and you fail fast. It's like, it's okay to break something as long as you can find out quickly and either roll back or roll out a fix quickly. And just, I guess, one example from my background, this was about 10 years ago. I worked at a company that was very much not DevOps. It was very much waterfall. You have devs, you develop stuff, it goes into a pot, and it disappears. And then maybe 1 month later, it comes out somewhere else in another part of the factory. And we were trying to fix a defect that we had in the code, and this was very old code. It was written in C. It used to run in MS-DOS. Back in the olden days, and it was always going wrong. There was always a defect. Somebody would fix it, it would break. They would fix it, it would break. And I came along and I said, well, this is crazy. This code is old and rubbish. Why don't we just rip it all out and write it again with, you know, new code, new technology? It's going to be pretty cool. And my team leader just kind of put her hands up and went, no way, you know, you can't do that because it's too dangerous. You're going to break other things by doing that, by, you know, changing something. We want to keep the bits that are working and fix the bits that are broken. But of course, my mindset was very different. My mindset was, well, what's wrong with breaking a few things if what we end up with is much, much easier to understand and fix and debug? And I think that's maybe an example of the difference in the mindset of somebody who, as Marius says, is about risk, about keeping the lights on, about not breaking anything at all possible, and somebody who said, let's just move quickly, and if we get a few little wrinkles on the way, then that will be fine. So I guess what I want to move on to is, again, a question you may have already answered, but I want to ask the question, is DevOps as a philosophy for everyone, for every company, or are there some companies where maybe DevOps is a bad idea, or maybe it wouldn't work very well? What do you think?
I think it's for everyone, because as you said, I was on both sides. So I was in companies where we had a dedicated DevOps team that was, so as a developer, I was developing a product, running that on some staging server. I didn't know how's that being deployed, what's the infrastructure, and it was a black box for me. And I was also in companies where everyone was interested in developing the whole infrastructure, and it was much easier to understand the whole product and to understand the issues that we have. And when some of the QAs comes with a problem to us, for example, something is not working, you immediately know how that should work, how the whole system is designed, how we deploy that, and it's much easier to understand the problem and to know how to fix it. So I think that, yeah, it's for everyone, definitely.
I also agree that it is for everyone and every company. Before I became the expert in DevOps, I actually worked for Ericsson, and I worked on edge routing software. This is a piece of software that not even Ericsson runs. After they roll it out, they give it to the company who is testing it for 5 months and then runs it, I mean the customer. And I still think that DevOps is applicable even when the software is literally operated by someone else. A mobile app is also operated by someone else. But the whole development process could still be understood in a way where operation in DevOps has a meaning inside your company and not outside your company. So I think even in cases like that, DevOps principles can be applied, and they are going to help the product and the company.
Okay, that's good. I'm just going to throw a bit of a spanner in here and say that maybe there are some companies where it wouldn't work, and it kind of touches on the next question really about implementation. And as Marius said, and it's definitely an issue, is if you don't already do DevOps, there is work, sometimes a significant amount of work to go from there to being a DevOps culture. And of course, depending on the company, the amount of work involved, the amount of money involved could be significant. The amount of time involved could be significant. What happens to your active projects while you're bringing in this new culture is an important question. What happens if you've got someone who's 95 years old, who's worked at a company for, 90 years or whatever, and they're going to say, no, I'm absolutely not going to do this. I do things my way, and I have all the expert knowledge in my head. What do you do with people like that? So there very much is a practical consideration, And it would be easy to say, you know, we should all do it. And I guess in an ideal world, that's probably true. But, you know, there is a cost, there is effort. And in some companies where they've maybe not set up their company very well, are they going to risk losing people over change? So, you know, so there is a cost, but I guess that kind of brings us back to the question of how do we implement it. So I guess the first obvious thing to say is we recognize, or need to be able to recognize whether what we're doing is a DevOps mindset, or if it's, say, a traditional mindset, what we might call silo. So we're devs, we're architects, we're support, we're testing, we're operations. So we need to recognize that, but okay, let's say most of us would know whether we're doing DevOps, and let's say we're not doing it, and we're going to say, well, okay, I really want to do DevOps because it sounds like a great idea. What kinds of things might I need to do? What things do I need to consider? How much is it going to cost me? Is it difficult? You know, what sorts of things might I do, or tools I might look at? I don't know.
Okay, so recently I started on a small project with a new team, and from the start we started with the tooling that we liked. Everyone in the team was included in the organizing of our code, of our infrastructure. So for the teams that are new, I think that implementation should start immediately. So before you should include everyone into the whole organization of the project. When you already have something, some product and the teams, that's the thing that I'm not really sure what are the best way to start, since if you start with separating the teams and DevOps, the guys who are just responsible for one thing, and developers who are developing on a black box, that's developing code that's going in a black box, that's a problem. So you should start with from small and then iterate to something bigger. And yeah, that's it.
I think you should definitely not start by just putting an ops guy into your dev teams. This is not the way. It's called a cross-functional team, not DevOps. I do think that moving from not DevOps to DevOps is significant effort. Even staying in DevOps is significant effort because, as Mario said again, it's very tool-centered, and those tools take time to develop, to adopt, to maintain. It is a conscious investment that you make in your company in order to be more productive. I think one place to start is continuous integration, for example. That's like sort of easier to introduce. And how I see a movement towards DevOps is actually a dissolution of boundaries. And this is done by providing tooling and a combination of tooling and knowledge share. And this is how, for example, the responsibility of running a service or monitoring it can be shifted from the ops team into the dev team. And that would be the process. And probably it needs to have iteration. Then yes, you need to start small. And I agree that you should start, when you are starting a new project or a new company, you should immediately go DevOps. And in the beginning, it might look like a lot of overhead. But even on a smaller scale, it is going to pay off very soon.
And I had just one thing to add. So you said that the bad way is just to add an ops guy to development team. But from my experience, I saw that sometimes that's a good idea. If you have smaller teams, there's a guy who can just start teaching the others.
Yeah, if it's going to be a collaboration, then
exactly,
yes, of course. If it's going to be a separation of duties, then it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us are kind of either engineers or we work for engineering companies, I'm guessing. And, you know, it's like having requirements, isn't it? The DevOps is the requirements. The requirements is to collaborate, to have single-mindedness, to have everybody having responsibility and accountability, everyone to have visibility of the product, all those kinds of things. It's almost like you could probably write a list yourself, stick it on the wall on a poster, And then, you know, as you're going along, you could be asking questions of that. It's like, well, let's start with, just like you say, a CI or a continuous deployment or whatever, and say, is that doing these things? If it's not doing these things, why are we doing it? If it is, great. Is there something else that we could do to actually kind of hit these requirements? So the great thing about, I guess, all software processes is they're, you know, continuously improvable. But, you know, as we said before, for some companies, there will be a real kind of difficulty. And I guess my advice would be, you know, as a CTO, as somebody who has to sometimes make these decisions is, you know, don't be afraid to bring in somebody to consult, you know, even if it's somebody going to come in for a week, going to cost you a couple of $1,000, and just to say, look, come and see what we do, ask questions, and just give us a real high-level view of what's going on. Because nowadays, there are lots of people out there, probably Accessor, if you ask them nicely, they might send somebody and charge you not too much money to do that. But, you know, pick the brains of people who understand what it is and see, you know, get somebody to tell you, are we a million miles away? And they might say your mindset is already there, you need some tooling. They might say you're going to have to sack half of your development team to do this. I don't know, but yeah, don't be afraid to bring people in.
I would also add, draw on the capacity of your own teams. Get people excited about DevOps. DevOps is a very lovable concept. There is a lot of fancy tools around it, a lot of lovely tinkering that engineers like to do. It's fun to develop something for yourself or for your colleagues. So I don't think it would be hard to get people on the DevOps train when they say, okay, I can do more. I can see my colleagues using the tooling that I'm creating. I can see that what I'm creating is passing the test and it's being used, and I see the monitoring. So try to, if you can draw on this kind of energy or enthusiasm, then it's going to be easier to roll into that mindset.
Perhaps we've got some examples of tooling or processes or things which would be involved in a DevOps process that we might not otherwise use. So we've already mentioned continuous integration. What kinds of other things might there be?
So, well, actually, in Ericsson, the team started to use Jenkins, which is a CI tool, by themselves because they felt the need for that. Yeah. I don't know, you have any ideas which is where a big company starts?
What does it look like? What new stuff might you buy?
Okay, so from the tooling, yeah, I mean, from the continuous integration and continuous development stuff, then maybe some testing tools. You know, when you know that your code is ready to be deployed. And you know, you should start testing from the start. So having a good test environment is an always good idea and helps your continuous deployment and integration services.
I hate to come up with a buzzword, but I think Docker-based infrastructure makes it, sorry. I know, this is a big move, but that makes deployed code such a small unit and usually such a nicely scalable unit that all this continuous deployment is very easy to implement, and the responsibility of running the code or the service can be very safely handed over to non-system administrators. So that's
okay, well, let's spend a couple of minutes on that. So containerization, the idea, I mean, when I first read up on Docker, not very long ago, I'm not an expert, they likened it to a shipping container. They said, why is it that I can send a grand piano, you know, from here to China, but I could also send a box of bananas or something like that? And the point being, if you put it into a standard size container, then all of the ships and the ports and things can handle it. So that's obviously the concept of, you know, Docker and others as a container. What's it really buying us? What's kind of the point of that? Why is that a good idea?
So it's, since I've been into in the microservice world for quite some time, if you start splitting your application into smaller pieces, that's really easier to develop and to maintain, and the most important thing is easier to scale. Also, deployment becomes easier because when you have one big application and you want to deploy it, it probably takes some time. If you're maybe using Java, it takes a lot of time to build the whole application, to run the whole tests, and the whole continuous integration is not really continuous, because if you start one deployment, you want to start another, the first one already blocks that continuous continuity. So with Docker, you split your code in smaller pieces with all those dependencies and libraries that code requires. And deployment usually takes a couple minutes and even less. Yeah, probably less. The same thing for the test and also for development. You know, if you split your application into Docker containers, when something fails, you already know where that code is. You can just pull that code down, execute tests, and see what's happening, what's wrong, debug that easy. That's much easier than installing one whole big application.
One other advantage that I think it's very important is the standardization and the minimization of the whole thing. I remember 10 years ago, when I got into engineering, we had servers at the Research Institute which ran our software. They were named after monsters, like literally the monsters. There were 6 of them, and they were called the Loch Ness Monster 1, 2, and 3. And this is what they were. They had everything on them. Only one guy knew what was on them. And you know, whether our programs ran on it or not, or which version was running on it, it was a mystery. Today, in the companies where I work, there are a couple of hundred virtual machines and just thousands of container instances being born and dying in a short period of time. And it becomes a herd, but it also means that every little error or mistake is just a glitch. And all the trouble of really running the software is somehow hidden in the infrastructure layer. Actually, I need to care less about it as a developer, and I can just focus on the single functionality that I want to get done. So this standardization really helps to operate it on scale, because we couldn't have operated 600 monsters.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is something, if you've ever done development, if you are a developer, the concept of interfaces is really a basic foundation, isn't it, of designing good software. Is if I am writing a code class, I might have a lot of code, but I might only expose 3 functions, and they're very easy to test, because as long as there's not too much state inside the code, I call those 3 things, they do what I expect, I'm happy. And really what containerization is doing is taking that concept out from just being a software or a code concept up to the hosting level and saying the same thing. Well, if all my dependencies are all in there and they're working on my development machine, it's much smaller, it's quicker, it's easier to test, and I don't have kind of dependency hell as well. And it's something that I guess going to come up later a little bit in my talk about using the cloud, and it's another reason why the cloud is a useful tool, is saying, why should I have to spend time trying to configure something like IIS to make my website run? Even a simple website, if I haven't done one for a couple of months, I'm start scratching my head, oh, the SSL certificate's not working, how do I do this? It's a concern that I shouldn't need to have. Whereas if I set up some tooling to deploy something in a container to app services or whatever on the cloud, and there are other vendors are available, then that's just a one-click deployment. I don't configure IIS, I don't care about it, I just know that my website's going to start running and people are going to be able to access it. So, again, containerization is a way of doing that. Just before we move on, I guess, to the next bit, because I think it's quite a big area about measuring kind of how we're doing, is just to quickly mention things like performance testing, and automated testing of your product. So these are hard things to do. Performance testing is hard if you've ever done it, even on a simple application like the one that I'm in charge of. There's so many different things to think about. What happens if we put the CPU up but we don't increase the RAM? What happens if we scale out instead of scaling up? What happens, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a hard thing to do, but it's much easier if I could remove as many variables as possible and just have a nice simple system. I can click one button, deploy a complete environment for performance testing, and spend my time worrying about performance testing and not spend 2 weeks trying to set up a new environment. So the automation of stuff I think is really key. As Ivan's already said, setting up a good testing environment is absolutely key. Again, our company spends too much time at the minute setting up testing, getting the guys to understand what they're testing and all the rest of it. So, the easier we can make that, the better. So, and just by the way, if you see me keep looking at my phone, I'm not expecting a call. It's just in case anyone asks any questions, which you can ask on the app, I will read them. But let's talk about something that Yulia's probably spent some time on. You mentioned it earlier about this, just because I'm doing DevOps doesn't mean it's easy to carry on doing DevOps. If we're not careful, we might slip back into an old mindset, or, how do we measure?
You're just slipping back into being doing DevOps hard. I don't think you can slip back. I think one good measurement of how much DevOps you are doing is the amount of change a team can make to a product without being blocked by another team. That is, if you can't deploy the product without another team, or you can't test it, then it's not fully DevOps yet. But I would even say, even if you need 10 rounds of permissions to a very small thing, well, it might be a business consideration, but still. But basically, the level of change that you can make without being blocked is the measure of how DevOps you are.
Yeah, and also, since we are, all of us are developers and our only goal is just to deliver some new things to our clients, we can also measure the time. So when the client says, I want this new feature, how much time do you need to show that feature done to a client on some real server? With good DevOps mindset, the most of the time you will spend on development and maybe some discussion with your teammates how to do it, and everything else should be really simple. So the whole continuous integration should be already there, and when your code is ready, in no second you should be able to show that to your client.
Development to production time, mean time to development to production, is actually a metric that DevOps companies use to measure themselves.
Yeah, and I think okay, I'll grab that in a second. One other thing just to mention is what we might call the qualitative measurement, which is, how can we go to somebody in the team and say, do you feel that what you are doing makes a direct difference to your customer? Who is your customer? Do you even know who the customer is? Do you know what the point of your product is? Do you know how your users or your customers' users are going to perceive your product? And if your dev kind of goes, I just got asked to make a new button and I've made a new button. But if they say, oh yeah, this is part of the bigger picture, this is a new module that does this, and it's to, so that the customer can get, a quicker journey or whatever it is, then that's a qualitative measure, because it shows that people not only are making a difference, but they kind of feel that they're making a difference as well. Sorry, you were...
Actually, I was trying to, make a comment or a question. You figured it out. Actually, yeah, you were saying about having a DevOps culture helps you deliver faster, but I'm concerned, this is a nice thing to say, but actually, if you develop real systems, complex systems, I think having a DevOps culture helps you estimate better the delivery time. Because if you have a developer who says that, yeah, I'm going to change this algorithm, it's very easy, but he's unaware of the impact in the infrastructure, in the scaling, in the usage of memory and resources, which maybe takes some more time because you need to restructure something, then you can say to the client it takes 2 weeks and actually takes you 3 months to do it. I think having a good understanding of all the team members, of all the implications of your delivery will make, even for the project managers, the job easier to estimate to the client how long this feature takes, actually.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think this kind of comes back to the idea of feedback, both generally. So something's been deployed, there's some feedback, maybe there was a problem, maybe it took a bit long. So getting that feedback to, again, this is part of all of our problem. If it was a bit slow, why was it slow? Are we going to do better next time? Great. Was there a problem? Was there a tool that's lacking? And of course, that's a very high level concept generally, isn't it? Is if you keep doing the same thing wrong, then there's something wrong.
Yes.
You should notice if things are going wrong. If they're taking longer than you feel they should, let's have a talk about it and work out. So actually, over hopefully a very short period, people can see that kind of effect.
And I would like to refer back to the implementation part. You said that maybe there is this guy who knows his stuff and is expert in his area, is not willing to learn about the other areas. I really think this will just not do. It is actually, like in your example, it is hurting the company, it is hurting the product. You need to have people who are willing to learn and understand about the whole thing. This is the only way it works
I mean, it's
really
like
well.
going to the startup culture, in fact, because in a startup culture, you assume that all the founding members, they know everything about even marketing, for example. I mean, that's going too far a little bit, but...
I think it helps if you have an interest.
Yes.
And in general, you want to work with people who are interested in the word.
True.
Yeah. But if you go into an existing company, there's always going to be that person who's not going to agree just because he doesn't want to. We've got time for probably one, maybe two more questions, if anyone's got any. We haven't really covered security. If you want to know, ask that as your question. If you have, otherwise we'll talk about security.
Do you have some recommendations for moving towards continuous delivery and dealing with the inherent perceived uncertainty that it comes with because of the fast delivery and so on?
I have. Just make sure that it is just as easy to revert as it is easy to deploy, and that there is a culture of monitoring your deployment. So there is a risk. Just make sure that when whoever can flip the switch can flip it back and knows when to flip it back.
Yeah, you know, if you migrate to Docker and having containers, it's really easy. You can tag every release, and if you send a new release, something goes wrong, push of a button, you can just redeploy that container that's failing and push the previous release. So, you're allowed to fail, and if you fail in a minute, you can just fix your issue.
Cool. So, okay, one last question at the back there, please.
My question is about how you see being compatible these two contradicting requirements. Being DevOps and also being a highly trained professional on one area. I was working on for a short time on a project where back-end developers took care of front-end development, and they were not using up-to-date technologies, and the infrastructure was quite poor. So the question, to rephrase, did you have some experience seeing very nicely built projects, but by DevOps? Is this a possibility or just an exception?
Yeah, so we're talking here about having somebody who's maybe been there 5 years, they're a back-end developer, and we're kind of saying, hey, do DevOps, let's be in charge of all these other things, how exciting is that going to be? But then as they start stepping more and more outside of their expertise, let's say, then there's a danger that the quality is going to suffer. So we're trying to build something good, but we're getting people who maybe haven't really kind of had that experience before getting involved. And and again, for me, the thing still, measurement, observation and measurement is you could ask the question generally, if I write something in the front end, how do I know that it's good quality? And the answer would be, I trust my front end developer. So if I'm now going to get my back end developers to start kind of doing some stuff that might affect the front end, then probably I'm going to start by saying, let's get the front end guys to help them with that, because obviously you're not going to just say, here you go, here's a brand new thing, go and sort it out. But the more you can kind of observe what's going on and react quickly to it and say, actually, we need to bring someone else in on here because these guys are not really ready to be kind of doing more stuff.
I would like to add, so as an engineer, you should be able to recognize where your expertise is ends. But also, being DevOps does not mean being an expert in all. It means being aware of the problem sets throughout the product and knowing which part is your expertise and which is someone else's expertise.
Great. So thank you, guys. We're going to be around all day. If you've got any other questions that you didn't want to ask here, that's absolutely fine. But thanks very much for your time and enjoy the rest of the day. And thank you to Accessor for sponsoring the stage.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.